She wasn't supposed to succeed, but she changed fashion forever. They told her she didn't belong. Not tall enough. Not thin enough. Not the right look. In an industry that thrives on perfection and polish, she was everything fashion wasn't supposed to be. And yet, somehow, she walked into that casting room, stood under the harsh lights, and changed everything. This is the story of a girl no one believed in. A face overlooked, a voice ignored. She grew up far from the glamour of Paris or Milan, in a neighborhood where dreams felt too expensive to afford. She didn't have connections, no designer clothes, no backstage access. But what she had was something much rarer: an unshakable will, a raw presence, and a fire that wouldn't go out. When she stepped onto the runway for the first time, the room didn't go silent. There was no applause. In fact, most didn't even remember her name. But someone did. Someone watching saw the edge in her walk, the subtle defiance in her stare. And slowly, quietly, the industry began to shift. One campaign turned into two. One maybe turned into a yes. The face they said wouldn't sell became the face on billboards across the world. But success wasn't easy. And behind the flashbulbs and cover shoots, there were still doors slammed shut, battles fought behind the scenes, and moments when quitting felt like the only way out. What she didn't know was that her journey wasn't just reshaping her life, it was breaking the rules of the runway itself. Because what happened next didn't just rewrite her story, it rewrote fashion history. And the moment that changed it all? It wasn't caught on camera. It happened when no one was looking. And that's where we begin. She was only 17 when she boarded her first plane. It wasn't to Paris or New York, it was a short flight to a city she'd never heard of, for a job that barely paid. She carried one bag, a pair of heels 2 sizes too small, and the weight of every time someone told her she wouldn't make it. The agency had sent her last minute, just to fill the space. She was never meant to stand out. But from the moment she stepped into that backstage chaos, racks of clothes, shouting stylists, nerves humming in the air, something in her shifted. She didn't know the names of the designers. She didn't know how to pose. She watched the other girls, mimicking their angles in the mirror, praying she wouldn't trip when her name was called. And when it was, she took a breath, straightened her spine, and walked. It wasn't perfect. Her steps weren't smooth. But her eyes? They told a story. Not of confidence, but of something deeper. Survival. Hunger. The kind of hunger that fashion didn't know it needed. Word began to spread. Quietly. Not in magazines yet, but in hallways, in castings, in whispers between makeup artists. Have you seen that new girl? The one with the stare? She's different. And in fashion, different is either dangerous or revolutionary. Still, the doors didn't fly open. She was still passed over for editorials. Still told she needed to lose weight. Change her walk. Soften her features. Some photographers refused to shoot her. Some designers told her agent she didn't fit their brand. She smiled politely, nodded at every rejection, then went home and cried into her pillow. But every morning, she got back up. She kept going. Not because she believed she was destined for fame, but because something inside her refused to give in. And then came the show. One casting that changed everything. A last-minute cancellation gave her a slot in a major runway lineup. She walked into the rehearsal like every other job, quiet, unnoticed, unsure. But something felt different. The lights were brighter. The energy heavier. The designer? Legendary. The clothes? Unlike anything she'd worn before. And as the stylist zipped her into that gown, dramatic, sharp, almost armor-like, something clicked. She was no longer just filling space. She was standing on the edge of something big. What she didn't know was that behind the curtain, someone was watching her. And they were about to make a decision that would change her life forever. The room backstage was thick with tension. Models were being rushed into outfits, stylists snapping at assistants, camera flashes testing the lights. But she stood still. Half in makeup, half in thought. That gown wrapped around her like it was made just for her. The fabric clung like a second skin, dramatic and bold, as if it had been waiting for her. She didn't know it yet, but the man sitting quietly in the third row during rehearsals, the The same man who had discovered more than one global supermodel had been watching her every move. She walked the rehearsal once, then twice. And on the third walk, he leaned over to the show director and whispered, "Her." That one word would pull her into a world she wasn't ready for. Fame. Pressure. A new kind of spotlight. But behind the scenes, not everyone was happy. Other girls had trained for years to be on that runway. Agencies fought tooth and nail to get their top faces into that show. And now, this new girl, barely known, rough around the edges, was getting special attention. Whispers grew. One model accused her of stealing a lookbook. Another claimed she had slept her way into the lineup. None of it was true. But in fashion, rumors spread faster than fire. And truth rarely mattered more than perception. Even her own agency began to hesitate. They liked the buzz, but weren't sure she was ready. She had no media training, no PR team, no curated image. Just a girl who walked like she had something to prove and eyes that dared people to look again. That rawness made her magnetic, but it also made her vulnerable. Then came the after-party. The moment she walked in, the cameras turned. Flash after flash, editors suddenly wanted quotes. A stylist pulled her aside and offered to dress her for Paris. But in that same crowd, just a few feet away, someone was already planning how to keep her out. A top model's manager made a call that night to have her blacklisted from a future campaign. She had barely taken her first real step into the spotlight, and already, the floor beneath her was cracking. What no one knew was that while the world was beginning to notice her, she was still battling a deeper silence inside. A part of her that still wondered, what if they were right? What if she really didn't belong here at all? The invitations came in all at once. Paris, Milan, London. Big names. Bigger runways. She should have been celebrating. Instead, she felt like she was walking through a maze with no map. Every step forward brought more pressure. Every new casting felt colder. Eyes scanned her, not just to see if she fit, but to search for weakness. Stylists whispered just loud enough for her to hear. Some girls stopped speaking to her altogether. She had become a threat, and in fashion, threats don't last unless they learn how to survive. At fittings, designers praised her look but questioned her confidence. She needs to smile more. She's too serious. She's not the face we imagined, but maybe it'll work. One brand promised her the cover of a major magazine, then dropped her without explanation. Her agent stopped answering calls as quickly. There were murmurs of a new face coming in, someone safer, easier to manage, more polished. Even her walk, once celebrated, was now being picked apart. Too heavy. Too sharp. Too much attitude. The same fire they loved was now being called unprofessional. She started doubting every move. Started second-guessing how she stood, how she spoke, how she showed up in the room. But she never let it show. On the outside, she remained composed, every inch the model they'd come to recognize. But on the inside, something was unraveling. Then came the biggest opportunity yet. A couture show in Paris. One of the most respected houses. One spot left. And her name was at the top of the shortlist. But behind the scenes, deals were being made. Other agencies were pulling strings. A rival model, backed by a powerful sponsor, was quietly pushed into the picture. Politics crept in where talent once spoke loudest. The night before the final casting, she sat alone in her hotel room, staring at her reflection. The girl looking back at her didn't look strong. She looked tired, worn, almost like she was shrinking under the weight of it all. But she knew this moment would define everything. Either she broke, or she stepped into that room and claimed what no one wanted to give her. The next morning, the casting room was filled with tension. Clipboards, cameras, silent glances. She stood at the edge of the runway, heart racing, knowing that behind those doors, someone had already decided how this story should end. She just didn't know if the door clicked shut behind her. Silence fell across the casting room as the panel glanced up. A long table stretched across the space, lined with brand executives, casting directors, and one very familiar face, the man who had noticed her during that first runway rehearsal. His eyes met hers for only a second, unreadable, then dropped back to the portfolio in front of him. No smiles. No greetings. Just tension. She stepped forward, heels clicking against the concrete floor, every inch of her body aware of how exposed she felt. They asked her to walk. Simple. Just a walk. But nothing about it felt simple anymore. She took a breath, turned, and moved. Smooth, clean, controlled. But as she reached the end of the runway, someone from the table whispered something to the woman beside them. She nodded, then spoke. Again. But this time, softer. Softer? That word again. She did it, adjusting her posture, trying not to let the frustration show. A third walk. A fourth. By the time they finally dismissed her with a polite, "Thank you," she already knew. Something had shifted in that room, and not in her favor. The call never came. But what did come was worse. 2 days later, photos of her from the casting appeared online, blurry, unflattering, and deliberately cruel. Comments piled in. Overhyped. Not runway material. This is who fashion's calling a star now? Someone had leaked the images. Someone wanted her out. She tried to ignore it, but the damage was fast. Brands that once reached out went quiet. A small campaign she had lined up was pulled last minute. Even her agency issued a public statement saying she was taking time to focus on development. They didn't even tell her before posting it. Then, just when she thought the worst had passed, she discovered the real twist. An anonymous message landed in her inbox. No name, no greeting, just a short sentence and 2 attached files. Check who replaced you in Paris. Then ask why. She hesitated, then opened the attachments. The first was a photo of the final casting sheet. Her name was crossed out in red ink. Next to it, a new name had been written, someone she knew. Someone from her own agency. Someone she once considered a friend. The second file was a screen recording of a message exchange between that model and her agent. It wasn't just a replacement. It was planned. Her slot had been traded for a favor. For leverage. For something that had nothing to do with her talent. Her hands shook as she read the thread over and over. Betrayal didn't even begin to cover it. The people who promised to build her career were the ones selling her out. And the model who stepped into her place? She was now being hailed as fashion's next breakout star. The runway wasn't just about beauty or walk or presence anymore. It was about power. And the people who held it weren't playing fair. What she did next could destroy everything, or flip the entire system on its head. Was strong enough to rewrite it. She didn't cry. Not this time. She closed her laptop, stood up, and stared at her reflection again. But this time, she didn't see the tired, defeated girl. She saw someone who had survived it all. The fake smiles, the closed doors, the betrayal. She wasn't going to disappear quietly. Not when she had come this far. The next morning, she walked into her agency's office without an appointment. Heads turned. Assistants whispered. Her agent wasn't expecting her. But when he saw her, his expression dropped. She didn't yell. She didn't ask why. She simply handed him a letter. Inside it was her resignation. A clean break. No press, no scandal yet. But her silence had a limit. Within days, she signed with a rival agency. Smaller, newer, but hungry. The kind that believed in stories, not just stats. And within a week, something strange happened. A designer whose show she had walked once years ago reached out directly. We saw what happened. It's time we change the narrative. They flew her out for a shoot. Not a campaign. A documentary. Real stories of real women in fashion. No filters. No edits. She told the truth about the show, the betrayal, the pressure. She named no names. But those who knew the system? They understood every word. And it went viral. Suddenly, people started asking different questions. Why were the same faces being recycled? Why were certain girls always left out? Editorials shifted. Articles ran with headlines like, "The model who spoke out," and "She wasn't supposed to succeed, but she's changing the industry." Then came Paris again. A different show. A different house. But the same city, the same runway. She walked last this time. Closing the show. Applause roared. Flashbulbs exploded. No one could ignore her now. Backstage, as cameras swarmed and press lined up, she stepped outside for air. And there, standing across from her, was the model who had replaced her the year before. The one who took her slot. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither said a word. Then the girl smiled, just slightly, and said, "You weren't supposed to come back." She smiled back. That's what makes it fun. But as she turned to leave, her phone buzzed. A new message. From the same anonymous source. Just 4 words. She didn't open the message right away. She slipped her phone back into her coat pocket and took a deep breath. The wind carried the sounds of the city, horns, laughter, distant music. It was just another night in Paris. But for her, it felt different. She had made it through the worst. Not untouched, not unchanged, but still standing. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of what came next. Later that night, alone in her hotel room, she opened the message. It was a link. No text. No sender. The link led to a folder filled with confidential booking sheets, casting records, and emails, proof of how many others had been pushed out, just like her. Names crossed out. Promises broken. All for politics. Image. Money. She scrolled through the files slowly, realizing her story wasn't the only one. It was a pattern. A system. She thought about leaking it. She thought about revenge. But then she thought about the younger girls backstage, wide-eyed, hopeful, walking into a world they didn't yet understand. Maybe what mattered now wasn't fighting back with fire, but using her voice in a way that helped others find their own. So she reached out. To a journalist. To a few models she had met in castings, the ones who had disappeared without reason. She started small, conversations, safe spaces, open talk about what really happens behind the runway. People started listening. Some were angry, some scared. But the silence was breaking. And that was the real shift. She kept modeling, but now she chose her work carefully. She built her platform, not for fame, but for impact. And slowly, the industry took notice, not just of her face, but of her voice. She became more than the girl who had been pushed out. She became the one who opened the door wider for those coming after her. Years later, a young model asked her backstage, "How did you survive all that?" She smiled, adjusted the girl's collar gently, and said, "Because I wasn't supposed to. And that's exactly why I did." In a world that tried to erase her, she became impossible to ignore. And fashion was never the same again. And over yet.